started actually a little bit more than a week ago when protesters showed up at the home of one of the Republican state senators who's facing a recall. His name is Randy Hopper, State Senator Randy Hopper, and there was this strange detail in the local coverage of that protest at his house. People who were mad about the union stripping thing and wanted to protest it showed up at Randy Hopper's house, and his wife came out of the house to address the protesters and told them that Senator Hopper no longer lived there. In fact, she said he no longer lived in his district at all. He no longer lived in Fond du Lac. She told the protesters that Senator Hopper had left his Senate district and now lives primarily in Madison with his 20-something mistress. Today, Wisconsin papers are all aflutter with news that despite Wisconsin's alleged terrible budget crisis, Republican Senator Randy Hopper's alleged girlfriend was able to land a sweet job in the Walker administration, getting what will amount to a $12,000 annualized pay raise over the person who had the job before her. Senator Hopper says he had nothing to do with her getting that job. He also says he's not living with her no matter what his wife says. But apart from the awkwardness for the state senator in question here, there's also the big policy awkwardness of whether or not Wisconsin state government is so broke because of all those greedy state employees, right? I mean, for the senator already facing the likely prospect of recall, this is not a positive development. But it is also really handy as a reminder about the whole nature of this fight in Wisconsin and why it is resonating nationally. The Republican justification for the union stripping business in Wisconsin was that it was all about the budget, right? But then something like this comes along, and we are all reminded that if it were all about the budget, people hired by the state would not be getting $12,000 raises, whether or not they were state senators' girlfriends. And you see this writ large in the policy Republicans are pursuing. Not everybody is taking a hit financially in these states that are pleading poverty. And this is important. These Republican governors and Republican legislatures all over the country keep saying that they're broke. They keep saying it's about the budget, it's about the budget, it's about the budget. But they are being incredibly generous to some with their budgets. Whether it's state senators' girlfriends or the forces in our society to whom they would like to redirect what are now public assets, there are some people who are making out like bandits toward whom states pleading poverty are being incredibly generously profligate. In Maine, for example, the Republican governor there wants to spend $30 million giving a tax cut to about 550 individuals, 550 of the state's millionaires. In Ohio, House Republicans say they want to spend $10 million to give the petroleum industry in their state a tax break. Pennsylvania's Republican governor wants to spend big on business as well. His tax proposals have been estimated to cost the state between $200 and $833 million. Remember, he's pleading poverty. New Jersey's Republican Governor Chris Christie wants to spend $200 million on tax cuts to business. Remember, we're broke. Not to be outdone, Florida's Republican governor wants to spend $1.5 billion on tax cuts for corporations. Michigan's Republican governor wants to spend $1.8 billion on business tax cuts. And of course, in Wisconsin, Republican Governor Scott Walker, his giveaways to business, his first actions as governor, are projected to cost the great state of Wisconsin nearly $140 million. And remember, we're broke. This is some spectacular generosity towards some very specific parts of society among these governments that are pleading poverty, complaining about giant state budget deficits. And states do have budget deficits. But all of these giveaways I just described are things that will make those deficits worse. All the Beltway media reporting on the fight in the states is about how governors are making hard choices and taking controversial steps to close their budget deficits. But all of these things they are doing open budget deficits wider. They make the budget problems in all these states worse, and they bend over backwards to do it. The people who are not benefiting from Republican generosity in the states, they're the ones facing cuts. In Georgia, the legislature looking at cutting funding to the state's university system by about $75 million. Pennsylvania's Republican governor proposing a more than 50% cut to that state's higher education system. In New Jersey and South Carolina, Republican governors want to drastically cut Medicaid benefits. In Arizona, the Republican governor's budget would get rid of health care for 100,000 poor people. Just in case anybody even tries to make a case that this is all ideological, this is just about Republican opposition to taxes and opposition to spending, consider that in most of these states, not only are Republican governors or legislatures trying to cut things like education and social services, they are also overtly raising taxes on poor people. We've got tax hikes on the elderly and on low-income residents in Michigan. Also, Republicans in Kansas and in Wisconsin are talking about effectively raising taxes on the working poor. In Georgia, House Republicans are talking about raising taxes on groceries. Also, they're talking about ending a tax break for blind people. That's up for grabs in Georgia right now, raising taxes on the blind. And just to spread the pain around, in Maine, the Republican governor's proposed budget would raise property taxes for the middle class. This is not some sort of policy doublespeak, right? This is Republicans proposing tax increases. I keep hearing that what Republicans are doing in the states is about closing the budget gaps. When you give away hundreds of millions of dollars to businesses, when you give those away as state revenues, that makes your budget problem worse, not better. And every time the national media reports these states that are giving these huge tax giveaways to businesses as closing the budget gap, they are wrong. Every time we hear that this is an ideological opposition to taxes among these Republican governors and legislatures, you got to ask what you believe about tax cuts, tax increases for poor people. Are tax increases for poor people also tax hikes? Huge tax cuts for the people in this country who are already wealthy, and tax increases on the poor and the unemployed and elderly people. The next time somebody tells you Republicans are anti-tax, ask them to be specific. We've been covering this story for a while now. I have a feeling we will continue to cover it for a long time. But whether it is the state senator's girlfriend and her giant raise, or it's multi-million-dollar profligate giveaways to people who already have the most money in these states, again, let it be known, it is not about the budget. Now it's time for The Ed Show. Have a good night.